That also looks good. Let me save that. And now we will fix the delete UI. Let me minimize the web project. Perfect. Everything will be inside category.id. So category. I will append that. And we need the ASP page here, which will be categories /index. Great. With that, let me see if everything is functional. Category. Let me try edit again. 333. Let me try delete here. That works. So our CRUD functionalities are working. Now for the next assignment, I want you guys to complete the toaster notification and implement the partial view. So good luck with that, and we will complete that in the next video. Finally, we have to add toaster in our project. That will be straightforward to what we did with MVC as well. So we go here, we have the partial view, copy that, and we will create the same partial view inside Razor project, shared, add Razor page, and we will call that underscore notification. Right here you see it added the page and model, but that is not needed with partial view. We can delete the .cs file and remove all the code, paste what we copied from the MVC project. We need to add this to our underscore layout, so let me do that before render body here. That looks good. In underscore layout, we also need to add toaster URL, so let me copy that from here. We will close the MVC project and add that here. Perfect. So toaster is added. Now we need to configure, or rather set, temp data on the post handlers. For that, let me make sure we are in the Razor project. In the create, before we redirect, we will set temp data of success, category created successfully, delete, category deleted successfully, edit will be category updated successfully, and that looks good. Let me run and see if that works. Go to category here, try to edit history, and perfect. We see the notification. Let me update that back here. And if we delete test2, perfect. All the toaster notification and everything is working as expected. Now with this, we have quickly learned CRUD operations on both MVC and Razor pages. The reason I introduced you Razor pages is moving forward when we add identity using the .NET Identity class library that is built on top of Razor pages. So when you have to edit the page, you know that Razor page will have a page model where you will have get and post handler. With the practice that you have in this section with Razor pages, you should be able to update everything with the identity pages that we will cover in the later sections of the course. Now the Razor project that we implemented was only for learning purpose. We do not want that in our main project for bulky, so let me remove that project here. And perfect, it is no longer there. And in the bulky, let me create more project. Typically when we are working with a real world project, we do not like to cluster everything together. Like right now you can see we have the data here, we have all the models here. If we have any constants, we will add them here. But in a real world application, it is best to keep everything separate in its own project. So we will be creating class projects in solution, select a new project, and we will search for class library. First one that we want to create will be bulky.dataAccess. This project will have everything related to database. Like we have the DB context, we will move that in the data access along with the migrations. So let me select that with the .NET framework. Perfect. Next one, let me create the same class library here, and that one will be bulky. Let me make sure the name, yep, it will be bulky dot, and then we will move all the models in its own project. Select that and create. Finally, I want to add one more project, which will be bulky.utility. For all the utilities that we will add in our project, like email functionality or maybe constants for our application, we will have all of them in the utility project. Let me create that project as well, and I will remove all the class files. We will be creating new class files when needed, but perfect. Now back to the MVC project, we have the bulky web, bulky utility, bulky models, and bulky data access. In the next video, let me remove all the logic that is bundled in the bulky web to the individual class libraries. Before we work on anything else, I want to modify the basic designs that we have or the Bootstrap theme that is being used in the course. We are using Bootswatch for our project, and if we take a look at the themes, that are multiple themes that are available, what I want to do is switch from the Lux theme to the Sandstone here, and doing that is super simple. We can download the Bootstrap file here, and let me open that. We will copy everything here. Let's go back to our project here, and www.root CSS, well, we updated that directly in the CSS here. We have the Lux theme. Let me remove that and paste the new theme right here, which is Sandstone. With that, if I run the application, you will see the new theme in action. But on top of that, I want to change the button colors that we have by default. Now rather than typing all of that HTML and CSS, what I have done is I have provided all the snippets, and you can download them from .NETMastery.com. There, if you go to course detail, you can get all the snippets. So make sure to download all of them, and in the attachments, we are in section 4, we have site.css inside there. If you open that, there is quite a few CSS right here, but mainly what I'm doing is changing the BTN outline, the BG success, and main Bootstrap classes that we are using, like BTN primary and BTN success. So copy all of that here. We will go to our solution. We have a site.css inside our CSS folder. Delete everything that is there and paste all the classes. Now I am not introducing custom classes. I am basically overwriting the classes that are there in Bootstrap. So that way we will not be using new classes. We will be using the old classes, and it is like a Bootswatch theme, and perfect. With that, you can see new design is in effect, and we have a nice color palette right here. I like this color palette more than what we had before, and I also want to change some designing with the create category and all the other pages. Let me do that real quick. So we will go to create category, we will go to views, category, create. Right here, let me start fresh. We will add a div, give it a class of card and shadow. Along with that, we will say border 0 and margin top of 4. Inside the main card here, we will add another div which will be for card header, and let me add the closing div. Perfect, that looks good. Then we will add the header here inside the class of row. We will set div class column 12 text center, and in the h2 we have create category. Let me cut that, paste it here, and give it the class of text white and padding y of 2. After that, when the card header ends here, we will add another div for the card body. So bootstrap classes card body here and padding 4. Perfect. Let me cut the form and paste it right here. Inside the form, let me give it a bootstrap class of row and see how the UI looks right now. I do not see the site.css coming into picture, so let me see underscore layout. We have site.css after the bootstrap, so that should work. But let me move it at the very end here and let me restart the project. Let's go to category and create new category. Perfect. This looks much better. Exactly what I want. Let me go back again, and I do not want the HR here. Remove the first row as well, and I do not need the margin top 4 as well. Where we have the class margin bottom 3 and row, we already are inside row in form. So what I can do is add a class of form floating, padding y2 and column 12. Where we have the input element, I will modify the class from padding 0 to form control, border 0 and shadow. And where we have the input element, I will say ms2. That looks good. Let me copy the classes and apply them for display order as well. Again, all of them are bootstrap classes, nothing fancy. Rather than btn secondary, let me do btn outline primary. Let me save that and let's see the difference now. The hot reload for some reason is not working. You can see it is not checked again for some reason. So let me restart. Perfect, it is checked now. Category, and let me go to create category. And great, the category name looks good here, but something is off. Let me go back. When we use the form floating here, the input will come first, and that will have all of these classes. So let me switch that around. I added them to label by mistake, and perfect. We can copy and paste it here, modify the ASP4 to be display order. We will have to rebuild. Let me do that. Category, create, and perfect. Category name looks good. Let me see, something is off with the display order. We do not have the form floating. Add that here and it will refresh. And perfect. That looks good. So with the row here, let me add padding top 2. And that looks much better for the create category. Let me apply all of these changes to the other pages in the next video. Now that we have the create page that is looking great, let me apply the same style on the other pages. It is pretty simple. Where we have the form here, let me delete that for a second, and this will be kind of a template that we want. So copy that and then bring back the form by pressing Ctrl Z or undo the changes here. Create is back to what it was. Let's work on delete. We will paste what we copied here and we will cut the form, paste it right here. Do the same for edit as well, but I think I copied the wrong div, so I'll have to copy this again. Go to edit, copy this, paste it again, and let me zoom in, cut this, and we will paste it within the card body. Perfect. Let me run the application and see. We also have to make them floating, so I can copy this div here, go to delete, paste it right here. Whoops, what happened? It pasted the wrong thing. Let me copy and delete, paste it here. We do not need validation, and this will be disabled. Let me copy this and paste it again for display order. Perfect, that looks good. Go to create, copy that once again, and modify the edit here. Paste that 2 times. Name and display order. Let me switch back to the project. It's already running and we have hot reload. So let's go to create. Well, create is done. Let me try edit. That looks much better. I need some margin here. Margin top 3. In delete as well. And let's see. Perfect. Looks good. We do not need the edit category. Let's remove that. Well, let me change it first and remove that row. Edit as well. And perfect. Let's wait for the hot reload. Great. Delete. That also looks perfect. Finally, let me modify the category list here. Let me switch back here where we have the index here. Go to my notepad, copy the template, paste it right here. And I do not think I need the container here, but let me cut everything else here and paste it in the cart body. Let's go back and see. Looks much better. We do not need the category list anymore. Remove that. No padding here. And let's see. Well, I'll take the padding bottom here. And let me see. Perfect. That looks much better. The heading here will be category list. And that looks good. We have multiple projects in our solution, but right now everything is bundled inside bulky web project. We want to move that from bulky web to the individual projects, so let me do that. We will move the data folder to data access. That project will be responsible for all the data related operation. Once we move that, make sure to delete the data folder here. Then we have models that we will move inside the models project, and we will delete the models folder from bulky web. Finally, in the utility here, let me add a new class, and I will call that SD for static details. This will be a public static class, and there we will have all the constants for our website. Perfect. And when we are working with data here, we have migrations. That also we will move inside the data access, and we will delete migrations from bulky web. Because we moved quite a few things in the data access project, we need the NuGet packages related to Entity Framework Core inside data access. If you open application DB context, you can see we have all the errors here. If you press Ctrl dot here, typically it does show you the package that needs to be installed, but it is not displaying that. So I can right click, manage NuGet package here, And right now when you click on the project, it will display that project, but you can click on the solution here, and if you click manage NuGet package, it will display all the packages for the solution. So Entity Framework Core, we can install that in Data Access. Next, we need the Tools package as well. And I believe that should be sufficient. Let's go back. And perfect, the errors went away. If we examine the dependencies, packages, we have those two. That looks good. Let me examine if migrations have any error. Nope, that looks good. We need the SQL Server here as well. So let me add that. Manage packages for solution and SQL Server. Perfect, that looks good. Now we have more errors with the models because the namespace have been updated. Well, technically they have not been updated, but I will update them. If I open application DB context, you can see it is inside bulky web. That is not true. Now it should be bulky.data access, and then we have the data. So let me copy that here, and I will modify the migrations as well. Let's do that. And perfect, that looks good. This bulky web will be data access as well. And great, I believe that looks good here. Let me save everything. And the models here will be different as well. That will be bulky.models. But bulky.models is not accessible here. So we will have to right click here, add project reference, and we want to add models and utility project. With that, if you press Ctrl dot here, perfect. We now have the bulky web.models, and let me try to build only the data access right now. And let's see if that works. And we have few errors right here. Migration could not be found. Let me press Ctrl dot here, and we have to install the NuGet package. Let's do that. We do not have the data here. We need the updated statement, and that looks good. Let me try to build that once again. Perfect. We have the same issue here. Add the using statement. And let me try that once again. There are few errors with the seed category table, but let me worry about that later on. Let me close everything right now, and we have to change the namespace in the models project as well. This will be bulky.models.models, but rather than that, let me move it directly in the models here. And that way it will be directly bulky.models. And perfect. Both of them looks good here. Save that. If I build this, it should work. Perfect. Utility project is also fine. Now let's try the data access, rebuild that one. And we have the models error here. Fix that with the using statement. And then finally we'll get back to the elephant in the room, which are these two error message. Now I want you to pause the video and try to find out on what is going on here. If you Google, you will not find that, but you need to focus something with the files that are open right here. I hope you were able to figure that out. Basically, when you see migration, they have the designer file and the .cs file. Namespace, we updated that in the .cs file, but not in the designer file. That is why we have these issue. So here we have to change that to be bulky.dataaccess.migration, and then the error goes away. we will have to do that in both the places here. That way it will link the CS file and the designer file. And now if we build the data access, that works. So perfect. Our data access, models and utility are working. Let me close all here. So now for the bulky web, let me run the project here and it will automatically display all the error message. There we go. Let me handle them one by one. We need to remove the old namespace, press Ctrl dot, and we will have to add reference to the other project, data access, and models. Perfect, that worked. Let's see the other one. Next, we have the category. The other errors are inside the views, so we will fix that later. We have one in program.cs. I can handle that one. And we need to go to views to fix the other errors. Perfect. So view, we have the error, and here we have the error view model. Now rather than writing everywhere here like bulky.models.errorViewModel, what we can do is we can add this bulky.models in the global using statement for the bulky web project. That we will do inside the view imports file. So here we can say using, we have the bulky.models, and once we save that, this using statement will be available for all the views right here. So then we no longer have to add this particular line, and you can see error view model is being readable. Let me build it once again. We should see fewer errors because we added the global model statement, and great, all the errors have been resolved. So even though it was a lengthy video, I did not want to implement the entire architecture from the beginning. It would have been simpler for sure. But many times what happens is you start simple and then as the complexity grows, you separate things out. Everything that we did in this video will give you some practice on how to separate things out if it is needed in your project. With that configured, let me run the project and see if everything is working as expected. Perfect. We have the create, edit, and all the pages are loading as expected. But now our application is much cleaner. We have multiple projects in our solution. When you are working with Entity Framework Core and you are just getting started, it is very common that you might run into some issues with a migration and some things might not work based on what you expect, and migrations are something that are very easy to be corrupted if you do not pay attention. You can always roll back a migration, you can make more changes, create a model, add new migration. But for some reason, if everything is corrupt and you want to start fresh while learning, how do you do that? Doing that is pretty simple. So let me show you how to do that in this video. First thing, we will go to SQL Server here and everything is corrupt. So we will delete the database, which is bulky right here. Let's delete that. Next, we will go back here. Inside the data access, we have migrations. Now our migrations are corrupt and we want to start fresh. You can delete the migrations altogether. Perfect. Now there are no migrations, there is no database. To start fresh, you can go to Tools, Package Manager, Console, and add a new migration. We know right now we are only adding the category model. So we can say add category to DB, and we are also seeding the category table. So we will say add category to DB and seed table. Now when you execute this, you will see an error message. And there you go. The target project is bulky web. Now we have moved our data to a data access project, so the default project must be updated to data access. So default project will be data access and the default startup project is bulky web. With that configured, if I run this, it will add migration. Now right now there were no previous migration, so what it will do is it will identify all the changes that it has to push to a new database. It has to create categories table, it has to insert data, and that is all we have right now. With that configured, we can hit the command update database and our database will be populated. Perfect. If we go back and refresh the database here, we have bulky, tables, and we should have categories populated. Great. So the only disadvantage this time is if you have added some new categories, those will not be available because we are starting fresh. But basically anytime in the video, if your migrations are corrupt and you don't know how to reset your database, this is the video that you should look for. In this short video, we will see the different service lifetimes when it comes to dependency injection in .NET Core. Now you do not have to program this along with me. I just want you guys to watch the next 10 minutes and understand what are the different service lifetimes in dependency injection. Before we take a look at any example, let me quickly give you a rough idea on what each lifetime is responsible for. Transient lifetime is the simplest one among all of them, and it is also one of the safest one. Transient basically means that whenever we want any implementation, create a new object and give that new object. You never have to reuse an existing object. Every time a service is requested, a new implementation is created. After that, we have the scoped, where it depends on the HTTP request. So whenever an HTTP request is sent to the server, that time for that scope, one lifetime will be created. And then the same object or same service is used wherever in that request the service is requested. So let's say for one single page load, we are calling a service 10 times. It will only create that object one time and it will use that same object 10 times in that one request. But then if a next request comes in, then a new implementation is created. And finally, we have singleton, where one implementation is created for the lifetime of the application. So once the application starts, we create an object of that service or an implementation, and that is used for all the upcoming requests unless you restart the application. So to give you a rough idea again, transient, new service is created every single time. For scoped, new service will be created once per request, and for singleton, new service will be created once per application lifetime. Now scoped is one of the most recommended approach for web application. Because of that, a service will be created on each request. But even with all of these overview, things might be a little complicated. So let me explain that little more with a real-world example. Let me switch to Visual Studio and we will be creating an MVC application. I will give it a name of DI Service Lifetime and let me create that. In the project here, let me create a new folder for services. In there, let me create 3 interfaces for the 3 services that we have. So the first one will be scoped. Let me add a new one here. That will be singleton. And finally, we will be adding the transient. These are just the interface name. We have not added any functionality. In there, let me add a method, getGuid, which will return a random GUID. So the return type will be string. Perfect. I will add that in all the three interfaces that we added. Now we need to add implementation of these three interfaces. Implementation will be pretty simple. Let me add a class here for the singleton GUID service that will implement the iSingleton GUID service, implement the interface. Here let me create a private read-only GUID with the name of ID, and in the constructor ID we will say GUID.newGUID. In the function here we just want to return ID.toString. That looks good. Let me create the same implementation for the other two interfaces that we have. Let me add a class which will be scoped GUID service, and that will implement the iScoped GUID service. I can copy everything here, paste it, and we will change the constructor name. Looks good. Let me add the last one, which is transient GUID service. Let me copy and paste it in here, and this will implement the iTransient GUID service. So now we have three interfaces and their corresponding three implementation. That looks good. But when we register these services to program.cs, we have to write the life cycle to which we want to register. So in the add service here, we will say builder.services.add, and then we have to write what life cycle we want to use. We have scoped, transient, and singleton. In singleton, we will have the interface which is iSingleton GUID service, and implementation is inside the singleton GUID service. That is how we register a service to the dependency injection container. We will also register the transient and scoped service. Perfect. So it is exactly same like if we were registering DB context to the container, and then when we have to use that, we will do that inside the home controller. Before we start using that, right here, let me create 6 private fields. 2 will be for the scoped service, 2 for singleton, and 2 for transient. We have scoped 1.2, singleton 1.2, and transient 1.2. Next, what we want is implementation of these interface. We registered that in program.cs right here. So basically we are saying that when someone asks for an implementation of iSingleton GUID service, we are telling the .NET framework that provide them the implementation that is there in the singleton GUID service. But there we are telling that use the add singleton, that is the lifetime. So when we want to use the implementation inside the constructor here, we can directly ask .NET Core that we need the implementation of iScoped GUID service, and we will call that as scoped GUID. Then we want another implementation of that, so scoped GUID 1, comma, we will have scoped GUID 2, and similarly we want the implementation for singleton and transient service. So these are the implementation that .NET Framework will provide based on what we registered in program.cs. Then we have to assign these implementation to the local variable that we have right here. For that we will say underscore singleton1 is equal to singleton1, and same for everything else. I can change this to be scoped 1 rather than scoped GUID here. Perfect. Looks good. So we have this implementation. On there we can call the method which is getGUID. Rather than making anything fancy, let me use a string builder for messages here, and I will append to that message using string interpolation. So first I will say transient 1, and then we will display the value using underscore transient 1 dot getGUID. We have that method, and after that let me add a new line. So perfect, that looks good. For the first transient, copy and paste that once again. We want to display the transient2.getGrid, and let me add one more new line there. Copy these, paste it 2 more times. Next we want the scoped one, scoped 2, underscore scoped 1, underscore scoped 2, and finally we need singleton. Perfect. When we return back, we do not want to return back to a view. We just want to return OK and display the message .toString on the screen. So now we need to think about what will happen. All of them have basically the same getGrid method, which returns a random grid. But the only thing that is different is on how the lifecycle have been registered. So let me run this and see that in action. And perfect, we have something right here. You can see when we are working with the transient request here, the grids are different. But when we have scoped or singleton, they are the same. As we know, singleton stays same for the life cycle of the application. So even when we refresh the application, scope and transient will be different, but singleton will always stay the same. You can see when I am refreshing here, transient is getting updated along with scoped, but singleton always stays the same. And then for scoped here, you can see every time for a single request, it gets a new value, but for one request, the value stays the same in both of them. But in transient, for any time a grid is requested, it calls a new grid. So that means every time when a transient is called, it basically gives a new implementation of that service. When it comes to scoped, the implementation stays same for one request. If in that one request we are calling this 10 times, we will get the same service. But for the next time, it will get you a different service when you are working with scoped. So with that, you can see how transient, scoped, and singleton are different when it comes to dependency injection service lifetime. Now we want to work on repository pattern. But when we are working with this, if things are confusing, do not worry. By the end of this section, everything will make much more sense, but stick with me and I will explain you everything that we are doing here. Let me close everything. Inside the data project, we have the data access. There we will be creating a new folder that will hold all the repository. We will have a repository folder, and in that folder, we will have the interface for that, which is iRepository. Repository interface that we will be creating will be a generic interface. So we will create an interface here, and I will call that iRepository.cs. Perfect. Now typically when we are working with generic, we do not know what the class type will be. So I will call that it will be a generic class T, and we will say where T will be a class. So when the iRepository will be implemented, at that time we will know on what class the implementation will be. Because right now we have category on which we want to implement repository. Down the road we will have product and many other tables like order header, order detail, and because of that we are making this generic here. Then we need to think about what will be all of the methods that we want right now. Now of course I do not expect you to think about all of them, but basically what will be the basic ones, and then if we have to update our repository, we will of course do that as we proceed with the course. So here first thing that I will comment, T will be category or any other generic model on which we want to perform the CRUD operation, or rather we want to interact with the DB context. For an example, I have written that T will be category, and then think about what will be all the operations that we need right now when we are performing the CRUD operations on category. The first one that I can think of is we need to retrieve all the category where we are displaying all of them. So we can say the return type will be IEnumerable of T, and we can call that method as getAll. The one after that will be if we have to retrieve only one category, because many times, like on the edit page, we have to retrieve the details of one category and then we have to pass that or display that on the screen. So in that case, the return type will be a single category, and let me call that function getFirstOrDefault. Now you can call this as get as well if you want. I like to call it getFirstOrDefault. That way I'm a little bit more explicit. But if you only want to call that get, that is also fine. And then name of the function, we can call that get because we are fetching only one of them. And that's fine here. What will be the parameter? Now if you examine what we are doing in the controller, category controller, where we have to retrieve one category in edit, you can see there are multiple ways to do that. We can use find, we can use first.default. We will be using the first.default approach, but there we need something special. We need a link operation. The reason we will not be using find is that only works on the ID. But if you want some other condition to get one record, you can pass that using link operator. So basically in parameter we will be getting a link operation like this. How do you write that here? For that we have something called as an expression, and there we will say function type will be t, boolean. So what we will be getting will be a function and the out result will be a boolean. We can call that as filter when we are fetching an individual record. Now do not try to spend too much time on why I have to write it exactly like this. You can think of that when you want to write a link expression that we have in first.default. This is the general syntax for that. So perfect, we have getAll and we have getIndividual. Then we have to create a category, remove a category, and sometimes it is possible you want to remove multiple categories in one single call. So we will say void here, we will have an add method where we have to pass the object that needs to be added. We have an update as well, and we have a delete. Then I also want something called as delete range, which will delete multiple entities in a single call. The parameter here, we will receive an IEnumerable or a collection of entities. Rather than delete, I like to use remove, so let me make them remove and remove range. Now if you remember when we were working with EF Core and we were updating or adding anything, we always had to call the save changes. When we work with repository pattern, we do not like the update or add method directly inside the generic repository. The reason is simple. When you are updating a category, logic might be different than what you are doing when you are updating a product. With EF Core, you only use the update statement, so it could be same as well. But typically I have seen that update is more complicated because sometimes you only want to update few properties or you have some other logic. Because of that, I like to keep the update and save changes out of the repository, and when we will implement, like category repository will implement the generic repository, on there we will have the update and save method. So in the generic repository, we will only have add and not update. We will have add, remove, and remove range. Perfect. With that, we have the generic repository and interface is looking good. We still need to implement this interface. Let me do that in the next video. Now we are getting into the fun part of implementing our repository. So in the repository folder, I will add a class, call that repository, and that will implement the iRepository. I will make that a public class. We need to implement the interface here, and it's not finding that. Maybe it's internal. Change that to be public here. If I press Ctrl dot, I am facing some issue here, and the reason is because I have repository and iRepository. If you want, you can rename that, but I will add the using statement for bulky.dataaccess.repository.iRepository. With that, we will get the iRepository, but one thing that we have to define in iRepository is what is the class. Right now also we are working with generic here, so we will say T, where T is class. And with that, the repository class is implementing iRepository. If you press Ctrl dot, we have the implement interface. When we are adding the generic here, we need to make the class generic as well, and perfect, that works. With that, we have all the methods right here. Let's implement that. When we were adding an entity, we used to add that on _db.add, and then we used to add the entity. So we will need that using dependency injection. I will have the private read-only application DB context, and in the constructor we will get application DB context and assign that right here. But now one thing will be different. Previously, when we were working on something, we had _db.categories and then we had add. But right now we don't know that, and here we cannot use the generic like this. So we cannot say db.t because it does not know what that stands for. We want to make sure we use generic, that way we can access the db set directly. So right here, I can create an internal db set on the generic type t and call that as db set. Then we can say this .db set is equal to _db dot. We can set the current one, that is the generic one that we get here, that will be set to the db set. So when we create this generic class on category, the db set will be set to categories. So in simple words, where we have _db.categories, this will be equivalent to the db set that we have. So when we were saying _db.categories.add and we were passing some entity here, now all we have to say is dbset.add. I hope that makes sense here. So where we have the add, we will say _dbset.add and we have the entity. That way we are able to use the db set and it will be generic based on the type repository here is implemented. So perfect, add looks good here. Next, what we have here, let me remove this and add a using statement. It is much cleaner. We have the individual get. And for that we will be working on an iQueryable of t. We will call that query and we will assign the complete db set here. So basically right now we have the complete db set that we have assigned here. Then on the query we can apply a where condition and I can pass the filter. Whatever we get here, we will assign that back to the query. So that way whatever condition we have, it will apply that on a where condition and it will have the query ready for that. Now get must always return one entity. So when we return back, we can say from query, we want the first or default. What we did here is exactly same that I had in the comment right here. First on the db set, we have the where condition, and then we are getting the first or default from that record. That is the logic that we have implemented right here. Then we have the get all. We can copy the I queryable there, and we can return back query.toList. Because DB set will basically have all the records like categories in our example, we have to convert that and return back. Finally, we have remove, that is on DB set we have remove, and we can pass the entity. Similar to remove, we also have a built-in method which is remove range. Let me add that, and that is also inside EF core. That remove range expects an IEnumerable, and it will remove all of those categories that are passed to the IEnumerable. So perfect. With that, our repository interface has been implemented, and this looks much cleaner. Let me continue from the next video. Now we have a repository and we have an interface iRepository. We need our category to implement that repository. So how do we do that? In the iRepository, first I will create a new interface that will be iCategory repository. We will make this a public interface, and that interface will implement the iRepository interface. And this time when it implements the iRepository, we know what is the class on which we want the implementation for this repository. That will be the category model where we want to implement the interface. That way we are actually defining now that when we need the implementation for iCategory repository, I want you to get the base functionality from repository. What that will do is that will make sure we have all of these base methods where entity will be category. On top of that, if you remember, we needed two more functionality, and those were update and save methods. So here we will have void update. There we will get the category, and let me call that obj, and we will also have a method to save the changes. So this is the final category repository interface that will implement the base functionality that we have for all the repository, plus we will have an update and save for the category repository. Now this is the interface. We need to have its implementation in the category repository. Let me do that in the next video. We created the interface for category repository. Let me add the implementation for that in repository. Create a class which will be category repository. It will be a public class, and that will implement the iCategory repository. If we press Ctrl dot here, it will implement the interface. But when you see it implements, it is actually implementing the add, get all, remove range. Those implementation we already have in our generic repository. So we do not want to add that again. We want to use the base functionality. Because of that, along with the iCategory repository, we also want to implement the repository with the class of category, and that will come before the interface like this. With that, you can see it does not give the error message for the iCategory repository or other methods. But now we have one error here which says there is no argument that corresponds to the required parameter db of repository category. Well, if we go to the repository implementation here, we are saying that application db context will be provided to you when the object will be created. Typically, when we use dependency injection, they are automatically injected. But in this case, we are creating on line 12. So what we can say is, hey, for category repository, we want to get that application DB context using dependency injection, and then we can add a constructor, get that here, and when we get this implementation, we want to pass this implementation to all the base class. So here we can say base DB. That way, whatever DB context we get here, we will pass to the repository and the error goes away. The two methods that we have here are pretty simple. When we have to save, we save that on _db.savechanges. And when we have to update the category, we will say _db.categories.update and we pass the object. Perfect. So now we have a category repository that has been implemented. How can we replace the application DB context that we are using here with our actual repository? Let me show you that in the next video. We have the category controller where we were using application DB context, but now we do not have to use this directly. We can access the category repository. How will we do that? Rather than application DB context, we will say that we want an implementation of category repository and we are asking dependency injection to provide that implementation. Then on the _db, we have all the helper methods that we have created. Well, rather than _db, it makes sense to call this category repository. That way it makes more sense when we are consuming that. Perfect. So when we have to retrieve everything, we have _category repo.getAll. We created that. Scroll down. Where we had to create, we had the _cat repo.add method. And when we have to save the changes, we will say _cat repo.save. Great, that looks good. Let me scroll down further. When we had to retrieve the category for edit, we will go to _category repo. We have the get, and we will pass the link operator u goes to u.id is equal to the ID. That way we are using category repository here. Next we have update. Let me copy what we have for add here, paste it right here, and we have update. That looks good. We have the find again. Let's copy the edit one, paste it here, and we have the find again, paste it right there, and we have the _category repo.remove and save changes. Perfect. So you can see with this we have our repository in place. If we save everything, we no longer have application DB context right here. When we run the application, we will run into an error message. I want to show you because this is a common error message many times. You can see I click on category and it says unable to resolve for type iCategory repository while attempting to activate the category controller. Whenever you see unable to resolve service for type, the first thing you should think about is there is some issue when registering that service to the container. Because here you are asking dependency injection to provide an implementation of the iCategory repository. But have you even registered that service in the dependency injection container? We have not. So that is one thing that you should always remember. If there is any service, you have to register that to dependency injection. Now what will be the lifetime? Typically scoped is the most common one, and that should be used so that for one request, it will use the same service. So here we have the interface as iCategory repository, and implementation is in category repository. Add the using statement there, and perfect. Now we have added the category repository in the dependency injection. So in controller, when we want the implementation, the program knows that I have to give the implementation of category repository. Let me run this, and everything will work exactly the same like it used to with application DB context. We can see all the categories here. If I try to create one, that worked. I can delete that. And perfect. All the CRUD operations are working, but now we are doing that with our repository. In the last video, you saw we were able to perform all the CRUD operations on category using our repository. But before the last video and current video, something has changed on my machine. And what I mean by that is if I go back and examine the appsettings.json file, you remember the server name was a dot. Now if I go here and if I connect using dot, it does not work. Well, I had to reset my laptop for some reason, and because of that, I encountered this issue. So now what is the solution? The localDB /MSSQL localDB, I'm able to connect to that particular server. For that, I can press the connect icon here and copy this, and we will update that inside the server right here. If we examine that, you can see rather than 1 /, it automatically added 2 /, and that looks good. But now you might be wondering that, hey, we had our migration, we had our data inside the database. What happens to all of that? Well, because we are using Entity Framework Core, things are super simple. We do not have a bulky database here. To create that, inside the package manager console, all we have to write is the command update database. We do not have to add any migration. We only have to update database because all the migration are already present in our code. With that one line, if I run the application now, everything should work the same. You can see category, and we have the 3 categories that we were seeding our database with. With that, I want you to analyze the importance of migrations and how easy it is to get started with a project. For an example, if a new developer had to set up this code on their laptop, they just have to clone the repository and press the command update database. Right now it is a local SQL server, but if it was Azure SQL, then they just have to run the command update database and the code should work automatically on their machine. And that reminds me of my good old days when I had to spend almost a day to set up a code on my machine. Because back then we had many dependencies and we had to handle all of them. But with Entity Framework Core, you can see if a database is different, it does not take much time. We only have to update connection string, run the command update database, migrations get pushed automatically, and we are up and running. So I wanted to quickly show you on how you can easily update connection string and again bring your project with all the categories. The next item that I want to show you guys, you do not have to do that, but I want to show you how that could be done. And what I am talking about is sometimes you might face a situation where you have to rename your project. Like let's say where we have bulky in the project names here, we want to modify all of them to be bulky book. So how do we do that? Well, it is pretty simple, but there are some things that we will have to modify. First, wherever we have bulky here, we will change the project name to be bulky book here, and when I do that, we will see an error message. Now typically you will not see this error message, but the reason I am seeing that is previously I tried to rename that and because of that a .user already exists at this location. So for that, what we will do is right click and let me open that folder. Inside there we have the bulky book web user. We will delete that, and then if I try to rename here, it will work. Now again, we don't want the bulky user, we want bulky book web, and perfect. So again, point number 1, you will not see that error message, but I wanted to explicitly show that. Because of that, I introduced that user. Then we have to rename all the project here. Let me do that. bulkybook.utility, bulkybook.models, and we have bulkybook.dataaccess. Right now we have renamed only the project, but all the files like the controller here, you can see namespace is using bulky web. In order to change all of that, we will do Ctrl+Shift+F, find and replace. Wherever we see bulky, we want to replace that with bulky book, and let me replace all. Perfect, that works. But now if you notice the controller, the namespace is modified here, but the repository and everything, you can see it is not detecting those projects. Well, sometimes it might happen that it detects that project. It all depends on the dependencies here. I am not able to open the dependencies, so let me restart Visual Studio. Once I do that, it will reload everything, and perfect. Now in dependencies, when you examine project, it has bulkybook.dataaccess, and it is working as expected. But you can see the models here is not working. So if we examine the dependencies in the data project, you can see the name here is messed up because we renamed a few things. Changing that is super simple. Edit project file. We will remove both the dependencies here, and we will add the project reference once again to models and utility. Perfect. With that, everything should be fixed here. Let me build the solution, and great, that worked. Finally, let me run the application and show you something odd. And great, right now you can see everything is working as expected. But for some of you, the footer here will not be properly designed. And let me show you how it will look like if we go to views, shared_layout. Let me break the CSS, and perfect. So this is exactly how it will look like. You might be wondering that, hey, what exactly is this CSS and why is it present? Well, what happens is there is automatically localization and bundling that is being done with the CSS. This has been introduced with .NET 6. If you examine the _layout.cshtml, there is a .css file, and it is automatically scoped to _layout. In order for this to be automatically added to CSS, inside the link here, we need the href with the project name .style.css. That is the CSS isolation that has been introduced, and I wanted to show that as well. So once that matches, it automatically binds that, and you can see the footer is functional as expected. But if you go to category here, things again will not work. You can see the exception here, and that is because knowingly or unknowingly we have also updated the database name to be bulky book. This has to be bulky. We did not intend to update the database name. With the Ctrl+Shift+F, when we updated, it updated the database name as well. Because of that, the connection was broken, and when we modified back, everything is working as expected. So even though we have spent about 10 minutes on this video, we have learned some things important. First, we saw the CSS isolation that comes with the styling here, and next we saw how can we modify the project name And if we modify some dependencies gets broken, how can we fix that and make sure our project is working as expected? Now traditionally in a programming course you will not see these common issues, but when you are working with a real world project, I myself have encountered these issues, and that is why I wanted to spend some time to give you exposure to these issues and how to resolve them. I hope this video was helpful, and let me continue with the course from the next video. Now in our project, we have category repository, and that is handling the CRUD operations for category. Category repository looks good, but it is not perfect. And what I mean by that is, let me go to controller here, and let's think that in a controller you have many action methods and you are using about 10 different repositories. You will have to inject all of them. That is completely okay. That actually gives you the freedom that hey, you only inject the repository that is needed. But one drawback here is if you go to repository, and if we go to category repository, we have the save method. Now this save method will be there in all the individual repositories that we will have down the road, like product, order, shopping cart, and everyone else. But the save functionality is not relevant to the repository or the model. It is a global method that is being used. So the correct way of doing things is to have this save in something called as unit of work. But before I implement that, I do want to tell you that if you only want to use the category repository in a project, that is completely okay. Adding a unit of work is not always required. I like that personally because it gives a clean approach, but with that there are some drawbacks as well, which I will cover as we proceed with the course. But before that, we have the big question on how will we have the unit of work. Inside the I repository here, let me add a new item. Let me stop the project first, right click, add a new item. And with the new version of Visual Studio, they have implemented a compact view. I do like that when I have to add the CSS file, but for interface, we can click Show All Templates here, Interface, and rename that to be I Unit of Work. Let's add that, and we will make this a public interface. In here, we will have all the repositories, so I category repository, and we will only have the get inside there. Next, we can implement the global method here, like save. Now the implementation of how we will get the category repository, that will be done in repository folder. We will create, I can use the compact view. I need only the class file. I will call that unit of work. This will be a public class and it will implement the I unit of work interface. We will press Ctrl dot and implement the interface. Perfect. We need an implementation for the category repository here. Let me add a getter and a private setter right there. Now, like in the category repository, we had application DB context using dependency injection. We will do the same thing, and that will be done in unit of work right here. We will have the class name as unit of work here, and we do not have any base class. We can remove that. Right here, where we have the category repository, we can add that in the constructor. Let me cut and paste it here. I will call that category, and we will say category is equal to new category repository, and we will pass the DB context right there. And we have an error here because in interface we called that category repository. We change that to category here, and perfect, the error goes away. So now in unit of work we have something for category repository where we are passing the DB context as well. Lastly, let me modify the save here, cut that and paste the implementation here. And we do not need the save method inside the individual repository. I'll have to remove that from the interface as well. And perfect, looks good. So with that, our unit of work looks good and it has the implementation for category repository. Let me close both the files here, and in the next video, let me work on category controller, not the repository. I closed that accidentally. We have category controller. Here, we do not want to use the category repository. We want to use the unit of work that we configured because it internally has category repository as well. Now we have to replace the category repository with unit of work in the web project. First, we will go to program.cs and we will have to register that to dependency injection. We no longer require the category repository. We need unit of work this time. So perfect. We have unit of work, and then unit of work internally creates an object or implementation of category repository. So here we will have unit of work, and let me call that underscore unit of work. We will get that using dependency injection, and we will call that unit of work. And right here, underscore unit of work is equal to unit of work. Now in unit of work, we have category, and there we have get all. So previously when we were using the category repository, we did not have to access that. But now in unit of work, we have to write which object we are working on or which repository we are working on. And then we can do everything like before. I will copy this, paste it in all the places here. And when we have the save, we do not have that in repository. That is directly inside unit of work. So we do not need the repository name. Then in the edit here, we will paste unit of work dot category. Same goes for update. For save, we only have unit of work. Perfect. Let me modify in all the places. And great. That looks good. With that, let me run the project again and see if everything works as expected. Perfect, we are able to get all the category here. Let me try to create one. That works, and delete is also functional. So everything is working as expected, but now we are using the unit of work rather than directly the repository. This gives us one advantage. In unit of work, we will have access to all the repositories that we want. But with that, we have a disadvantage as well. Like in the category controller, we only want category repository. But in unit of work, it will create implementation of all the repositories that are registered, like if we have product, if we have order, or shopping cart. So there are pros and cons in both of them, but personally speaking, I like the unit of work implementation because it is much cleaner. So with that configured, let me continue from the next video. Now I hope you are comfortable with controllers, actions, and we are going to add one more hierarchy on top of that. And the only reason I am showing that is it is actually a great feature if you have to divide few things in your project. And that is called as area. Typically when we work with routing, we have controller and then action method. But .NET team has also provided something special to divide few things in different areas. Like if you have a customer-facing website and admin panel, you can divide your project in those two areas. Now how do you add that in a project? We will right-click on Bulky Book Web here, Add, and we will click New Scaffolded Item. Inside there you can see we have an MVC area. Let's add that, and we need to give area a name. Let's say we have two sections in our website. One is for the admin section. So let me add an area for admin. It will add the NuGet package and scaffold that area. Another area that we will add will be the customer area that will have the code related to customer like homepage, details, and much more. Perfect. Right here, when we scaffold that, you can see it adds a folder with the name of areas. Then it has admin, which is the area that we added. And inside there we have controllers, models, and view. So basically all the code that was previously just in one location, we can now break that down in different areas. But when we add area, you can see the routing here also changes. In the scaffold.txt, it displays that, hey, now you have to add areas in the routing as well. So let me do that. Let me copy this, and we will go to our program.cs. We have the controller route here. Let me paste that here, and we will add a /. So now we need to say what area should be invoked by default. I will call that as customer. We do not have that, so let me add that area as well. And we will call that customer area. And let me add that. Perfect, that looks good. Now with that, we will have to move our controllers inside the area folders. Now in the area, you can see we have folder for data and models, but we have moved that to the individual project, so we do not need these two here. Let me delete that from both the areas. We will only have controllers and views inside the area folder. Category controller belongs to the admin functionality, so I will move that to the admin controller. Home controller is a customer facing, so I will change that and move that inside the customer area. With that, our default route now is customer area, home controller, and index section. Now when I moved this, the namespace were also updated. But if in your case you selected no and you did not update the namespace, make sure to update that namespace. On top of that, how do you tell a controller that this controller belongs to a specific area? For that, we have the area attribute here, and we need to give the name that category controller is inside the admin area and home controller is inside customer area. With that configured, let me run the project. And things are not working. The constraint customer inside the route option. Let me see what the route option is. And of course, this will be equal to and not a colon. Now we have a more user-friendly exception which says the view was not found. And that is indeed correct, because we have moved the controller, but we did not move the corresponding views. So let me go to the views here, category, we will move that inside the admin here, and home, move that to the customer views right here. Once you move that, and if you run the project, things will still not work. Where is the namespace? Let me see. It is inside the category views. And yep, we have the model of category. But how will we know where exactly is this category? If you examine, we had that previously in the view imports, we had that models. So along with that, we also have to move the view start and view import. Both the files we will paste it inside the view folder in both the areas. Perfect. With that, let me run the project once again. And perfect, the website comes up and everything looks good. But when you click on Home and Privacy, that is working because both of them are inside the customer area. But category is inside admin area. When you click there, it tries to look for category controller in customer, which does not exist. So we have to modify that. So what will happen is where we have the ASP controller now, we will also have to define ASP area. So category is inside admin and home controller is inside customer. If you do not write the area, it will look for that controller in the existing area where the page is already residing. That looks good. Let me run the project and see if that works. Perfect. Admin category, that works. If you click create new category, it will work because even if you have not defined the area, we are looking inside the same admin area that we are in. So you can see create, back to list, edit, everything is working because we are working in the same area. Now typically moving forward, I will explicitly write all the areas, but for category, I think we are good to skip that because we will always perform CRUD operations from the category index page. But perfect. With that, you can see how areas will add one more layer in navigation, and now when we are working with routing, we will define area first, then controller, and then the action name. Now we have our category, but we will be adding product in the upcoming video where we will be performing CRUD operations. Now before I add that, let me add a drop-down in the navigation. So I will go to getbootstrap.com and let me go to the documentation, search for navbar. We have a drop-down here that looks good. Let me copy the li here for drop-down. Copy that. Go back to our code. We have underscore layout open here. If not, you can open that. And after the li elements, let me paste that right here. We go back to the UI. We have hot reload and that kicks in, but I see a blue color and I think that is because of the CSS. Yep, I do not need that. I can comment that out. Save that and perfect. Looks good. The first one here, I want that to be category. Cut the li and paste it right here. We will have to rebuild. Let me wait for that. And perfect, we have category, but I do not see the color here. We will have to make that text dark. Save that here. And perfect, we have that. But rather than that, I can just give it a class of drop-down item. And let's see if that works. Perfect, much better. After that, I will leave the divider here. And let's see, that looks good. Rather than drop down here, let me make it content management. And perfect, that looks good. Now we have worked on performing CRUD operations on category. But in our website, we will be selling books, and basically we need product that will contain all of the books of our website, and that will have a category. So we need to create a model for our product, which is book, and perform CRUD operations on that. First thing that we have to do for that is actually create a model. Let me close all the tabs here. We will do that in the bulkybook.models here. Right click, add a new class, and I can call that as product. We will make this a public class, and what will be all the properties of product? If you recall, inside category, we used data annotations and we had the ID as the primary key. We can copy those two, paste that in product here, because we will have ID, and rather than name when we work with a book, we have title. We do not want max length there. This looks good. After that, let me add description, ISBN, and author for our product. Now our store is a bulky store where we will be selling books in bulk. So if they buy more books, they will get more discount. For that, let me add first property, which will be list price. And I will add a display property here, because if you notice here, it has a list price. I want to display that with a space. So for that, we have the display data annotation, and I will call that as list price. And of course, I forgot the name here. That looks good. On top of that, I want a range validation that price must be between, let's say, $1 and $1,000. Looks good for the list price. But our store is a bulky store, so based on the different quantity, we will have different price. Let me paste that 3 times. The first one, let me call that price. Next one, I will call that price 50. And last one will be price 100. Price 100 will be price of the book if they buy more than 100 quantity. Price 50 will be the price for more than 50 quantity. And it will be price for 1 to 50. So list price will be a different price, and price here will be the cost of product for the quantity 1 to 50. If they buy more than 50, then we will give them the price 50. For more than 100, we will give them price 100. Now this looks good for all the properties that we want right now. Of course, we need category inside our product, and we also want to add an image to our product. But we will do that later on. First, I want to keep things super simple. Right now our model has few strings and few double, kind of similar to what we had for category. And with that in place, I want you guys to practice CRUD operations on product similar to what we did with category, and that will be your next assignment. Let me walk you through that in the next video. We have added the product model to our project. Now we have not added all the properties, but I have added the basic properties for now. Before we add this product table to our database, we will have to add that to application DB context inside the data access. So let me copy this DB set for category, and we will rename that to be product. And the table name, I will call that as products. Now that looks good. On top of that, I want to see the product as well. So let me copy the hash data here, paste it one more time, and then we will have to create new products here. When we seed something, you can write whatever you want, but for consistency, I have provided that inside snippets. If you open the resources and snippet section 6, we have seed products. Let me open that, copy everything, and I will paste that inside the hash data. There I am populating 6 products. And these are all the properties that we have added in the product model, so it should match perfectly. With that configured, now we have the data and we can seed our table. So with that, you can work on your first assignment. Inside there, I want you to push product to the database, and when you create the products table, along with that, all the 6 records will also be created because we added inside the hash data. Once you create the products table, then you have to implement the product repository for data access. You will create the product repository interface and implement that, and after that you will also add that to unit of work. That is the basic configuration that you have to do for your first assignment. So good luck with that, and we have already done that with the category repository and the category table. All the steps are exactly the same, so I hope you have good practice before we move forward in the next video. I hope you were able to complete the assignment, but if you face any issue, let me do that together in this video. First thing, we have to create our products table in the database. So we have the package manager here. Let me open that and we will add migration. Now when you add migration, if you face error here, like if I just add the migration, add products to DB, this will not work because the default project here is the bulky book web project. It should display an error message. Right now we see a different error message, and that is because where we have the has data, this should be product. I hope you corrected that when you tried the assignment, but with that, let me try adding migration. Of course, we get error message because the default project is web project. When we add a migration, that has to be updated to data access. With that, let me add the migration, and perfect. That looks good. Let me update the database. And great, it completed successfully. If we scroll down here in the migration, it is also seeding the data. So that looks good. Let me switch back to the SQL Server here and examine bulky, tables, products table. It should have 6 record. And great, that looks good. If we go back to the assignment, our first step is complete here. Next, we need the product repository. For that, we will go and basically we can copy and paste the category repository, rename that to be product repository. We will have to do the same with the interface here. So this will be product repository. Copy that name, and we will make sure to rename our interface. That will be on the product, and in the update we will get a product object. Looks good. Let me go to the product repository here, and we will modify that. Product repository. Class name will be product repository, and this will be product. Constructor name will be product repository, and in the update we will get the product underscore db dot products dot update. Perfect. Our repository also looks good. Final step, we have to add that to our unit of work. Let me open the interface as well as the implementation. This one will be product repository. We will call that as product. Close the interface here. In the implementation, we will have to add the product repository. Name that as product, and we will say product is equal to new product repository. Pass the application DB context. With that, I believe our unit of work as well as a repository for product is complete. We have unit of work in place for our product repository. It is time for the second assignment, where you have to create product controller and action methods for the CRUD functionality. After you create the controller and action methods, then you will have to create view for all the CRUD operations and add client-side and server-side validation. All of the steps here we have already done that for category controller, so you have to replicate them, and the only reason I am making you replicate them once again is that you will gain some experience on how to work with all the CRUD functionalities with models, views and controller. The only difference this time is that you have more properties in product than category model. So make sure to practice all the CRUD operations, and I will show you how to do that in the next video. I hope you were able to complete all the CRUD operations with product. I do not want you to see me typing everything here. Because of that, what I will do is copy what we have for category and paste that for product and modify that real quick. So let's go back to our code here, where inside the areas here, admin controller, copy and paste the controller, and I will rename that to be product controller. Let me copy that name, and I will modify the class name and the constructor name. Everything else looks good here. Wherever we have category, I will have to replace that with product. So I can do Ctrl+Shift+F, replace in file, and in the current file, I will replace category with product. I will match the case here and replace all. Now here, make sure you are only doing that in the current document. Once you complete that, let's take a look here. Perfect. On unit of work, we are going into product and retrieving all product. Where we have the create, we do not need the custom validation, so I can remove that. And this looks good. Inside the edit get action method, we are retrieving the product here, and rather than category, let me also rename this. So lowercase category, we will rename that to lowercase product in the current document, and that looks good. Perfect. In the edit post here, we are updating. Inside the delete, we are fetching that. Looks good. In the delete post here, we retrieve the product and remove that. So with that, the controller looks great. Now we need to add views for our application. If we go back, we need to create views for the CRUD operation. We already have the views for category. Copy and paste that again. The complete folder, I will rename that to be product. And let me see what we have in index. In all of them, we have to replace category with product. So an easier approach is, let me open all of them here. Close the product controller. We only have the 4 view open here. Ctrl+Shift+F, replace in file. And we will replace that in all the open documents, which are all the views for our product. Replace all. Did not find any with the lowercase. Let me do that with uppercase here. And perfect, that worked. Now we have a different properties inside product. So rather than name, we have title. Let me rename that and paste it 2 times. After title, we have description. Let me modify that and paste it here. I will copy and paste this about 5 more times here. Then we have the ISBN. Let me modify that. Next, we have the author. After that, we have the price. First, we have the list price. Next, we have the price 50. Well, we first have the price. Then we will have price 50 and price 100. So copy and paste that 2 more times here. We have price 50. And finally, we have price 100. Great. That looks good for create. Let me copy this and go to edit here. Paste it right here. Perfect. Inside delete as well, we will have to paste that. and we will remove the validation. On top of that, let me disable all the input fields when we are deleting. Perfect. That looks good. Finally, we have the index here. Scroll down, and in index, I want to display 5 properties: title, ISBN, the list price here, author, and category. Where we have the for each here, we do not need any order by. And first we have the title. Next we have ISBN. Whoops, not that. Just ISBN. Copy and paste that 3 more times. We have the list price. Next we have the author. And finally right here, I want the category. But in our current model, we do not know what is the category of a book or product. We will cover that in the upcoming videos, but this looks good. With that in place, let me add a navigation to that in _layout, views, shared, _layout. We have the drop down, copy the ally, paste it one more time. This will be for product. And that looks good. I believe that is all that was needed, but let me run the project and make sure that works. We will go to content management, product here, and great. We have the product list here. Let me try to edit. Perfect, that looks good. Whoops, description is 2 times. In edit, let me remove one. And rather than input here, let me change that to be a text area. When we have text area, we need the explicit closing tag, else it will not work. When we save that, let's go back. The hot reload kicks in, and perfect, we have a text area. Now of course this is not perfect right now, but we will modify that in the upcoming videos. Right now if I try to update something here, it should work, and perfect, that is working. Let me revert it back here. Let me create a dummy product here. Create. That works. Let me try to delete that. And perfect. All the operations are working as expected. The only thing that I will change right now is add a little bit of space. So let me go back. And in all of the views here, where we have margin top of 4, let me make that margin Y. Save that. It was in the edit. Perfect. That looks good. So I will add this margin Y4 in all the places. Delete as well. I need the margin Y. Create margin Y. Index margin Y. Perfect. Let me save all. Go back here. And perfect. Now everything is looking much cleaner. But basically we have the product grid operation. Those are working as expected. Next thing that I want to work on here is when we are working with product, we need an association between product and category. If we go to category, it is action, sci-fi, and history. Basically any product that we have will belong to one of the category. So there will be a foreign key relation between product and category table. How can we accomplish that with EF Core? Now if we did not have EF Core, we will basically have a column of category ID in the product table, and then we will have a constraint on foreign key which we will add in SQL Server. But thankfully, because of EF Core, we do not have to touch our database. All we have to do is define some constraint in our model, and Entity Framework will take care of everything else. So how can we accomplish that foreign key relation between category and product? Let me close all the tab here and let me open the model here, which is product model. There we basically need a column for category ID. So prop integer, I will call that category ID. Now if I add just this column, table will not know that this is a foreign key to the category table. In order to explicitly define that, we need a navigation property to the category table. So right here, we will have a navigation property to category table, and I will call that category. And on top of that, we have to explicitly define that this category property is used for foreign key navigation for the category ID. And for that, we have a data annotation of foreign key, and we can say that this category table has a foreign key which will be category ID right here. That is all that we have to write, and then Entity Framework Core will take care of everything else. So you can see how powerful Entity Framework Core really is. With that configured, let me save that and I will add a migration. So we will add a migration and I will call that add foreign key for category product relation. Now when you change anything with the core model, if it requires a database change, Entity Framework Core is smart enough and it does all of that. You can see it is adding a column here and it is updating some data. But when it is updating the data, you can see it is setting all the value to be 0 for category ID. That is not what we want. Because we are seeding our data, we need to actually pass category in that seed data. So this migration that got added, I am not happy with it because I am going to change something in the seed data and create a new migration. Now only because this migration has not been pushed to the database, I can directly come here and we can go to migrations and delete that migration. You do not want to do that directly here. You can go to Package Manager and you can write the command remove migration and it will remove the last migration that was added. You can see in the migrations folder that migration does not exist anymore and it got removed. So now we can add a new migration, but before we do that, we have to fix our seed data that is inside application DB context. Here we have to pass a category ID. You can pass anything you want. I am going to be random about it. Some of them I will say 1, the other one I will say 2 here, and last one I will say 3. So perfect. We have assigned some value to the category ID, and when we are seeding, make sure that you use the category ID that exists and not something random like 11. That will not work. With that configured, let me go to Package Manager and I will add the migration once again. Perfect. Let me see the values. Yep, we have the correct value this time, and that looks good. So our migration is looking good. Let me update the database. And perfect, that is done. Let me go to SQL Server. We will do select top 1000. And great, we have category ID. On top of that, if you expand that and examine the keys, you will notice a foreign key relation between product and categories. So with that, if you try to edit here, and if you try to enter, let's say 11, it will not work because of the foreign key relation. So with that, you can see how easy it was to add a foreign key relation between table. All we had to do is use the foreign key data annotation. With that configured, let me continue from the next video. Now before we move any forward, let me open the product model in the models project here, and I will add one more property which is kind of critical, and that is image URL. When we work with any product here, they will typically have an image, so let me call that as image URL. It will be a string property right now, and it will be empty right now. With that, let me save this, and we will have to add a migration. I will call that add image URL to product. The seed entity did not work. Well, you can go there in the data and you can add an empty image URL. That should work right now. We will fix that as we proceed with the course. Perfect. Let me add the migration once again, and it should work. Perfect. Let's update the database. And great. Now our model for product is complete, and we have added all the properties that are needed. How this image URL will work, that we will cover in the upcoming videos. What we want to work on is when we go to product and we edit a product or create a product, we cannot toggle the category. So let me fix that first. We need to add a drop-down right here. Before we even add that drop-down, we need a list of all the categories that we can display in the drop-down. So first we need to retrieve that in the controller. If I open the product controller, when we are passing it back to the view, we are passing list of product. On top of that, we need to pass list of all the categories, or we can pass a select list that we can use to populate a drop-down. Now there are multiple ways to pass that thing, but if we want to pass that along with this object, that is not possible because when we return back, we can only pass one object. We will see how to overcome that in the upcoming videos, but let's say you only want to return a list of product and not any other model. In that case, if we have to pass some additional functionalities, there are many other ways, but before we see how to pass that, we actually have to retrieve that. So to retrieve that, I will store that in an IEnumerable of select list item. If I press Ctrl dot here, it is inside system.collections.generic, that is the IEnumerable, and select list item is inside microsoft.aspnetcore.mvc.rendering. Now if I press F12 on the select list item, it will navigate me to the class here, and you can see with the select list item, we have text and value, and that is what we will be populating and using in our dropdown. So let me call this category list is equal to, we need to retrieve all the categories, so unit of work dot category dot get all, and then if we just do that, it will not work because here it is retrieving an IEnumerable of category, and we have to convert that to an IEnumerable of select list item. How can we do that dynamic conversion while we are retrieving some things from the database? In order to do that, we have something powerful known as projections in EF Core. In order to use projections, we will say .select, and there we will give it a random object. Let me call that U. And what object do we want to return from here? We want to return a new select list item. So we will write that, and inside there, what properties should be populated. Let me break it out in different line here. We want to populate the text, which is inside u.name, and value we want ID of the category. So u.id, convert that to a string. That way what will happen is each category object here will be converted into a select list item, and it will have a text and a value. And that is how we can convert a category to an IEnumerable of select list item using projection. Again, this is a very powerful feature because you can see how in a single line, when you are retrieving something, you can easily pick only some columns and not all the columns. You can convert that to a new object and directly assign that. With that, we have the category list right here. But now the question is, how do we pass that onto our view? Let me do that in the next video. Now we have to pass some data from our controller to our view. And for that, we have multiple items or multiple routes that are available. First one here is a view bag. View bag transfers data from controller to view and not vice versa. And that is exactly what we want. We want to pass the data that we have in our controller to our view, and it is ideal for a situation in which the temporary data is not in a model. Like in our example, we need the drop-down list, and that is not within our model. We do not have a property to store that. So in that case, we can store this in a view bag and pass that to our view. View bag is a dynamic property that takes advantage of the new dynamic features in C# 4.0. Any number of properties and values can be assigned to a view bag, and the view bag's life only exists during the current HTTP request. View bag values will be null if there is any redirection. Like in our case, we will be passing the value from controller to view, and we will not be redirecting. That is why the view bag value will persist. Last point is that view bag is actually a wrapper around view data. Now you might think, what is view data? But we will cover one thing at a time. First, let me switch back and show you how we can use a view bag. Right here in the code, we are getting all the category list, but I am inside the index section. Let me cut this. We actually need that inside the create action. So right here, let me paste that here. And now you might be thinking that we are not passing anything here. Why don't we pass the category list? But if I go to the view, you can see we have defined a model at the top, which is the product model. So now we need to pass this category list to our view, and we want to use view bag. So for that, we can say viewbag.categoryList is equal to category list. We can give any name that we want, and this name that we give here will basically act as a key value, where key will be category list and value will be whatever we assign here. Once we add this here, then inside the create, we can fetch that and display that in a dropdown. Let me scroll down, and where we have the price 100, after that let me copy and paste it one more time. Label will be for category ID. ASP validation, we can change that to be category ID, but here we want the select field. Now when we are using select rather than input, we cannot use the self-closing tag. We have to explicitly close that. And after that, I will add one more default option here, which will be disabled, selected by default, and there we will display select category. Now ASP4, we have that as category ID, but we need to display all the items in the dropdown. For that, we have a special tag helper ASP items, and this expects an IEnumerable of select list item. We have that in our view bag, so in order to extract that, we will write view bag dot, and we need the key name. Now key name, if you write here, it will not help with IntelliSense because it is not dynamic. You can give any key name here, and IntelliSense cannot detect what you gave, so you have to type that and make sure that it matches. If there is any spelling mistake, things will not work. For the class here, we will give it a bootstrap class of form select, and with that, Let me run the application. We go to product here, and we will have to go to create new product, scroll down, perfect. We have select category, and there we have action, sci-fi and history. So our drop down is looking great with create product. Now that is one way of doing things with view bag. Let me continue and show you the alternative in the next video. We have seen view bag in the last video. Next we want to see how we can accomplish the same things with view data. View data also transfers the data from controller to view and not vice versa. And again, it is ideal for the situation where the temporary data is not in a model. View data is derived from view data dictionary, which is a dictionary type. View data value must be typecasted before use. Like if we go back, when we were using view bag right here, we did not have to cache that data, it was all dynamic. But when we use view data, we will have to cache that before we use the value. And lastly, the view bag's life only lasts during the current HTTP request, and view data value will be null if redirection occurs, similar to view bag. So there are quite a few things that are similar here, but let us see that with an example. First, we have to go back to the controller. Let me comment this out, copy that and paste it here. Rather than view bag, we want to use view data. If you use dot there, it will not work. You have to define that in a square bracket, and what is the key value, like in a dictionary. That is how you assign a value to view data. Now the question is, how do you access that inside view? When we were using view bag, we did not have to do conversion, but with view data, we will have to do some conversion here. So we will use the @ sign, and we will say view data here, write the key name. Let me go back and copy that to avoid any spelling mistake. And then we have to explicitly convert that. So we will say as, and this will be an IEnumerable of select list item. With that, the errors go away, and you can see how view data might be a little inconvenient as compared to view bag. But with that, everything should work the same. Let me restart the application and see that in action. We go to create new product, and perfect, that is functional. But there is one more thing that you should be aware of. View bag internally inserts data into the view bag dictionary. So the key of view data and property of view bag must not match, because both of them will go to the same entity. Now before I wrap up this video, previously we have seen temp data, which are used to generate alerts, and temp data can be used to store data between two consecutive requests. Temp data internally use session to store the data, so think of it as a short-lived session which will only exist for one request. Now temp data value must also be typecast before use, so check for null values to avoid any runtime errors. Finally, as you already know, temp data can be used to store only one-time message like error messages or validation message, and if you refresh the page after that, it will go away. So that gives you a brief idea on all the differences between view bag, view data, and temp data. Now we know view bag, view data, and we are using that in our application. But think about that. When you have an application and if it grows, you have many more data. What if you have 10 view data and 5 view bags that you are using? Things will start getting ugly, because when you will look at the view, you will not be able to easily identify where this is coming from. And the reason I am saying is our view is tightly bounded to this product model, but product model does not have all the data that is needed. So typically I avoid using view bags and view data as much as possible. The alternative to that is to tightly bind your view to the object that you want. If object is not a simple object, you can create a combination of object, and that is called as view model. View model, as the name suggests, it is a model which is specific for a view. So let me show you how to do that, and then everything will make much more sense. In our models folder, let me right click, add a new folder with the name of view model. I will have to stop the application here, and I will call that view models. Inside there, I will add a new class file, and I will call that product view model, where VM stands for view model. It will be a public class, and we will think about what will be all the entity that we want for our product. We want a product object, so first let me create that property, which will be product. Next, what we want is an IEnumerable to hold the drop down. So we'll say prop, and that will be an IEnumerable of select list item. When we need the select list item here, we will have to install the NuGet package microsoft.aspnetcore.mvc.viewFeatures. The property name, we will call that category list here, exactly what we have in the product controller. Now inside create, we were not passing anything to the view, but if we go to our view, we were using product. Now what we will be using is product view model. We cannot access that directly, so we will go bulkybook.models.viewModels. We have the product view model. Now view model is something that we will be using in many of the views. So it makes sense to add this to our import statement inside the admin area, view import. Let me add that using statement, and I will also add this, copy that to our customer view, view imports, and we have a global view imports as well. Perfect. Let me save and close all of that, and now we can remove this. Product view model will be detected. When we add this here, our title is inside product, so we will have to add that in all the places. Let me modify that for all of the properties here. Whoops. You can see the errors went away, and then where we have the ASP items, we do not want any view data. We want to access that directly from our product view model. If we go back, we have the category list here. Now if you try to access category list directly here, it will not work. So basically when you have to access something from the model directly, and if it does not work, you can always access the model by using the add sign. So we can say add model, and there we have the category list. Now the product here is working, but if for some reason this was not working, you can access product by writing add model.product. Both of them are exactly the same things. So perfect. We are using our view model. Let me scroll down. I believe everything else is working. Let me build the project here and see if that works. We still have to modify our controller, but let me do that now. Product controller, where we have the create, we need to pass a product view model. So right here we will say product view model. Let me call that product VM is equal to new. And then we have to assign the properties here. Category list will be inside category list, comma, we have the product. Product will be new product. So perfect, that looks good. And then we will be passing the product view model. If you want, you can just cut this from here and assign that to the category list like that. It should also work. We do not want the view data or view bag. Let me remove that. Perfect, much cleaner. With that, we have a view model that we are passing to our create view. Let me run and see if that works. We go to product here and create new product. Perfect, that is working. But now if you post here, it will not work, because if you examine in the HTTP post, we said that there will be a product obj. This we have to modify to product VM, and when we are adding something, we'll say obj.product. With that configured, let me save and run the application and try to create a new product. I will populate dummy information. Category, let me make it action and create. And we see an exception. Now you might be wondering on why we are getting this exception. Because the exception here is inside the select field and it says object reference is not set to an instance of an object. That is a common exception when you are working with C#. Basically anything that is being accessed here does not have a value. But why when we are posting it is trying to access these fields? The reason is simple. Something in model state is not valid and it is returning back to the view. When it returns back, we are not passing the view model, so dropdown is not populated. Let me show that. I will add a debugging point here and let me hit create once again and see model state is valid is false. Now what property is false here? We can examine that in the result view. And the category list is invalid, the image URL is invalid, and the product.category is invalid. Now why is it validating all of those properties? We do not want the validations on them. So basically we need to tell that, hey, when you are validating our model, I do not want validations on these three entities. One way to fix the image URL right now is, let me go back to the create view and let me just copy and paste this for image URL. That way we will not be bothered with that exception, and let me show that. Now of course we will fix image URL as we proceed, but right now let me show you the issue with other two entities. We hit create here. Let me hit create here. Model state is not valid, and now there will be two entities. One will be category list and another will be category. So we basically do not want to validate those two properties. Doing that is super simple. All we have to do is add an annotation on top of the category list, which is validate never. And that will make sure that it does not validate this property that we have. I will also have to add that where we have the category right here, and if you want you can also add that